hands off Syria, mainly because there was a Amnesty International demonstration which was against President Assad and was in support of the so-called Syrian rebels. We ourselves and a number of other organisations demonstrated or had a counter-demonstration against the Amnesty International demo, which, if nothing, at least told them that we weren't going to allow such a situation to occur without protests by people who support the real Syrian people.
Aside from what's happening in Syria, there was a demonstration organised by Amnesty International, pathetic, where they're supposed to be a partial organisation, but they were actually sporting, well, basically, you know, for NATO to go in and basically bomb Syria, because they really had a big banner opposing Medvedev of Russia, because they sanctioned. I think I myself, I would actually support that. The UN sanctions, the position that Russia took and China took. Otherwise, if they didn't take that position, I mean, Syria would have been another Libya. Because once you've got to understand is that this war is not about war, you know, as it says, the people's war against an oppressive regime. It's a war which is being pushed by imperialist countries, particularly Western countries, to dominate the Middle East. I think we have to oppose that, because the imperialist strategy is now to take over countries and install their own regimes and all that. Because if you look at it, you know, with the question even on the Palestinians, if these people are really genuine, really fight for democracy and liberation of people, they could have been calling for NATO or UN forces to sort out Israel, you know, when they were bombing Gaza, which everybody seems to keep quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, even like people on the left, so-called left, I mean, suddenly something happens. I mean, they're all up there with the banners, this and that. But on the question of Syria, even the question of Libya, it seems to be very quiet for some reason. I mean, they don't seem to understand this war is not about the war between what's happening in the people amongst themselves, but it's a war which is sort of organized and financed and by the Western countries to dominate the world, to economic resources and stuff like that. As I said, we need to build, we know that there are big voice here, but we need to build that movement where we can have our own anti-imperialist movement in this country. You can't export revolution change regime from outside. It's impossible. It is up to the people of that country to have that, to organize this for, you know, for or against. But it's very clear, you know, the Western countries are now, I mean now, because what's over Russia and the elections in France as well, they're sort of sitting, laying back now. But, you know, I think the main strategy is to arm, be a proxy war, carry on until probably the Syrian regime is sort of drained out. And what happened in Libya, I mean, you know, the NATO bombing, the UN bombing, and then the so-called free army sort of marching behind and taking over town and town. So yeah. I think, because I think Rapal's going to speak after here, he'll probably solve everything himself. So that's what I have to say. And thank you.
I think we're going to say the same. We're going to let Habar give us more information, but I just want to go back to say the situation with Syria is not the last years. It is actually an old issue since the 1976, the Arab Summit, which is mandate Syria to send their troops to Lebanon in order to control the situation in Lebanon. At that time was a civil war in Lebanon. Now that's suitable at that time with the United States because they thought the Syrian would be able to crash the PLO. As you know, the Lebanese government at that time was very fragile, so it was really very important that the United States and the Western power supported the Syrian. When under the Arab umbrella, the summit which taking place in Jeddah, where they sent 40,000 Syrian troops to Lebanon. But then the situation changed. We know that Amal split as a party, and out of the split we have the Hezbollah. That was a result of the Islamic Revolution around 1979. The Western interest changed now. The support of the Assad senior regime to Hezbollah is actually was a problem for the West. So just giving this bit background, this is not the last year situation. This is an old issue where Assad regime, known of supporting the resistance in Lebanon, and then the Hamas resistance in Gaza. So it is very important to look back and see it's not the so-called the Arab Spring, which is I call it the American Spring. It is the New Middle East, which has been announced under George Bush by Secretary of State Rice. Now, in order to defeat and to tackle the regime of Assad, you need to have three important elements the West had to use, which number one is a human right. That's the way you convince the mass in the street, to convince the Western, because we worry a lot about cats and dogs and seeing children being killed. It's all right, you know, the sanction of Iraq for 20 years, children, 500,000 children died. It's just all right. But so we need to use three important elements. One is the human right. Number two, we need the media to convey the message, how horrible the regime in Syria. And number three, we need the group, we need the players in order to take on the regime. So let's go back to the first one, which is the human right. I don't know if a lot of you are aware that this is not the first time Amnesty International did actually take such position on in pro-Western imperialist regimes where they accuse anti-American regimes of human rights abuse, right? At the same time, when the Amnesty International spread a lot of lies about Libya and about Gaddafi importing all these Africans to fight in order to attack his own people, we know that the Amnesty after that was too late, apologized for the big lies, and they said it was really not true. The same situation will be repeated in Syria. We heard Amnesty saying Assad bringing Iranian expert to support him and to help him. Iranians sending planes of volunteers and money and gun, which is there's no proof at all. But the worst thing is that Amnesty accused Assad in June 6 of committing a crime against humanity. And to put a case against Assad, you need to have physical evidence. You need to have people to come and say, we did actually witness the Assad regime, the army, killing civilians, imposing curfew, cutting children to pieces and make them sandwiches and throw them to dogs to eat them, and all this propaganda conveyed by Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. By the way, we know Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya is owned by Fahd Salman, the ex-king of Saudi Arabia. So we know that Amnesty also gets financed by George Soros. And we know George Soros is a Zionist billionaire who actually a supporter of Israel. Not today, not last year, for the last 30 years. He is an active supporter of the state of so-called State of Israel. Now, at the same time, when Amnesty building cases against Syria, the Saudi regime invaded Bahrain. And 2 years ago, the Saudi regime actually invaded north of Yemen and was slaughtering the Houthis, a group of Yemenis, a tribe who live in north of Yemen. And we didn't see any report by Amnesty about all this abuse of human rights. Also, if you notice, we didn't see any report about the hundreds of the Syrian policemen, security personnel, and army was killed. It was almost about 7,000 people so far. We see no at all any report about the attack by the, I called it the Contra I'm referring to the Reagan-Contra in Nicaragua in 1979, where he actually used this group of so-called Contra as a proxy to attack the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. They're using the same tactic, and that's a tactic where you don't need to send the American and British army to attack a country. You create so-called, in the Syria case, the Syrian Free Army. In Lebanon, we have the same, in South Lebanon. We have the Lebanese Free Army, South Lebanon Army, which is that time supported and trained by the Zionist regime. Just try to look at the first element, which is the use of a human right as a big propaganda. Now, I want to just tell you who is the witnesses who will be actually putting the case against Assad if the regime being dragged to the International Court of Justice. And the witnesses will be actually the ex-former president of Lebanon, Hariri. Surprise, surprise. Hariri actually, he's a CIA agent, he's a Saudi agent. In fact, his father was also a Saudi agent. And he will be one of the witnesses against the regime. And also, they have evidence by Lebanese people who called Amnesty. So at the same time, when we asked years ago the International Court of Justice to try the Zionist regime for committing a massacre in Jenin, in West Bank, Amnesty said we need to have witnesses. And you know at that time it's not going to be possible for Palestinians to come to court and put a statement against the Zionist army and still living in West Bank. So they demand that time, Amnesty, that we need to have witnesses to come in front of the panel and say what they witnessed in Geneva. Right? But in the case of Syria, phone calls is okay. We have to trust Hariri and Jeffrey Feldman. Jeffrey Feldman, he's assistant to Clinton, and he's the one who actually worked very hard to campaign in Lebanon, providing Pizza Huts, McDonald's, free food, 24 hours for the Lebanese to demonstrate against the Syrian army, which is ended up being kicked out of Lebanon. That was actually work of Jeffrey Feldman. For some reason, this man, anywhere he visits, he leaves disaster behind him. He's known of being a right-wing Zionist. Now, this was the human right. I don't want to really spend more time talking about human rights because we know, and Cheryl just mentioned about the Amnesty demonstration in town. We know that BBC only covered one side of the story, they refused to cover the other side. And we know that the only demonstration, or no, not even demonstration, the only gathering by Amnesty in town was that one, supporting the opposition to President Assad. The elected, the legitimate government of Syria in behalf of the Syrian Contra. Now the second one, which is I want to go to, is the media. We know that the Al Jazeera actually admitted on 3 occasions that the people who called him were lying. And I seen myself, obviously because I can read Arabic, I've seen a big demonstration in Bahrain. And the reporter was saying, this is actually in Syria. I've seen tear gas, the police attacking the demonstrators, but they said this was in Syria. And for some reason, in the back of the demonstration at the wall, it says the Manama, which is the capital of Bahrain, Manama Medical Center. I've never heard there's Manama Medical Center in Syria. But that shows, again, the lies and deceit by the Al Jazeera and the Hamad government in Qatar in order to target the regime of Assad. And I can give you a lot of examples by watching Al Jazeera every day or watching Al Arabiya. I can give you a lot of examples of lies spread by these two networks. At the same time, we didn't see anything, and you can watch this yourself, we didn't see anything about Bahrain in Al Jazeera. sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, they mention for 2 seconds to be sure that everybody sleep that time, so nobody can hear what happened in Bahrain. Now the group, which is, we need to look at the players. Who is the players who want to get rid of the regime and take over? The number one is the ex-vice president of Syria, Abdelhaim Qaddam. Abdelhaim Qaddam, he gave an interview, I got a copy of the interview, to Israeli Channel 11. And he said if he take over, he will normalize the relationship with Israel. He was asked by the reporter, are you aware that we are the Israeli TV? He said yes. And the debate on the same channels next day, the presenter asked the reporter to make it clear that we are the Israeli TV. He said yes, I did. And he played that bit back again, that he was told we are the Israeli TV. The second person is a guy called Farid al-Qadri. The reason I mention Qaddam and al-Qadri because the other players who are in the media, they're not important. They're there to give interviews, but the main important trusted individuals, like the French and American interpreters, is Qaddam and al-Qadri. Why Farid al-Qadri is really trusted? Because he's a member of AIPAC. So we know that AIPAC is the American Jewish lobby group, and for some reason, there's a Syrian who's a member of that group. So he's really trusted by the Americans and the Zionist regime. These two individuals, working together with Jeffrey Feldman and Hariri, supported by Prince Bandar bin Sultan, who is actually, well, he thinks sometimes he's a brother of George Bush, because he lives in that house more than he lives in his own house. His wife called Barbara Bush mom. That showed how close. He just donated $2 billion to the so-called Syrian Free Army. Not 2 million, not 20 million, 2 billion out of the Saudi money to support Prince Bandar. He is the ambassador. He used to be the ambassador, Saudi ambassador to Washington for maybe before even Jesus existed. 50 years. He was a young man. You know, the last, I think, 5 years, he was called to go home and to head the Saudi Secret Service, because it looked like after 50 years he must be trained very well by the CIA to lead such Secret Service. This players include the Saudi regime, USA, Turkey, and Jordan. All these three countries I mentioned, not only by supported by financing and by army, also the media is under the service of the so-called the Syrian Free Army 24 hours. Now I want to just mention something about the amnesty, right? Which is, they reported, I think 2 days ago, about the Syrian army. They show an old photo of a soldier, 3 soldiers, who burying a man alive. So digging a hole and put this man in the hole. And the fiasco that they did actually, before I tell you the whole story, they actually apologized and said it was fake by the Syrian thugs. And they was asking him, you support Assad? And he said, yes. He said, why are you taking photos? You take it to Al Jazeera. And the guy said, no. So they start putting dirt, all dirt in here. And when they come close, it was just soft and nice, you know, putting they cut the photo, we didn't see the rest of the photo. We know next day that somebody in Dara, which was happened, been taking a photo from a window where this guy was actually taking out and was hugged by his friends that you're a good actor. Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and Amnesty reported as part of the Assad brutal treatment to his citizens. That is one thing I forgot to mention. But I just want to end up by asking maybe 2-3 questions, and I leave that for you to think about it, and Haba will come next and we will maybe have a discussion after that. I just want to ask is that how come the Amnesty as an NGO, supposed to be an NGO, unbiased, as they claim, will present evidence to the International Court of Justice without any physical evidence other than phone calls and the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Lebanon. You mentioned, Chair, about the United Nations observation to the situation in Lebanon, the team who was sent. I just want to take you back to say that the Palestinians asked for the same thing 3 years ago, and the Israelis refused information to enter West Bank and Gaza in order to absorb the daily brutal treatment by the Zionist regime to the Palestinians. But in the case of Syria, they had to accept it, if you like it or not. I also want to ask a question. Why Amnesty, as an NGO, have that much power to submit an application against a nation such as Syria? As will never happen. You know, that will be done by a body who actually, a Syrian body who actually have evidence that the regime is brutal, and they will assist him to put the application. But the application is signed and submitted by Amnesty International. And the last thing I want to ask is that with Amnesty known bad record, can we trust this group? Amnesty never reported, and I'm going to repeat that again, reported any of the security forces being shot and killed by the Syrian Contra, and by obviously Amnesty never condemned the training by the CIA and the Turkish army and the Jordanian army on Istanbul and the borders of between Syria and Turkey. And the last thing I want to just mention is that if you notice, when we have the right in London, you just imagine the Syrian ambassador start giving people leaflet telling them that your government is in a breach of human rights. We will close the embassy and we will cut our relationship with Syria. But in the case of Syria, you have Robert Ford. Robert Ford is an American ambassador who actually traveled in Syria and hand over leaflet to the demonstrators, asking them who to call if they get arrested, who they should ask assistance. This was actually done openly. There was nothing secret about it, you know. But again, might is right. I mean, who can stop the American ambassador from doing that? And I just want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight to you.
Comrade Chairman, comrades and friends, thank you very much for inviting me to address you this evening. There's really not much I can tell anyone of you because you're all politically acute people. You understand the situation that's going on. But since I've agreed to speak, I shall have to say something. So don't expect to be much enlightened by what I have to say. There's not much that I will say that you don't know. But all the same, it's very important to stress certain points. The first question that, I mean, when you have a crime, for example, of murder, in the crime of murder, the first question that really you have to ask is, who would be the beneficiary of that crime? So Syria is being ripped apart by a criminal conspiracy, by international imperialism, and if Syrian regime was to fall, the question is, who will be the beneficiaries? And who will be the losers? And why are the losers being made the target? Syria's misfortune is that Syria has an independent foreign policy, which Syria has pursued for over 4 decades. Syria does not do, it's a small, plucky little country, it just does not do what our lords and masters, the robber barons of finance capital, consider is their right, i.e. to be obeyed at every corner and at every place. Syria does not do that. Syria is a part of the Arab resistance against American imperialism in the area. This does not mean that these regimes have always consistently done everything right, but by and large they have done right, and that's why they've been targeted by imperialism. And Syria has turned itself into a base for the revolutionary resistance movements in the Middle East. There are movements that are connected with Palestine that are based in Syria, from Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a left-wing communist organization, to the Hamas Muslim movement, which is a faction of the Muslim Brotherhood. But nevertheless, they take part in the resistance. And these Muslim movements have become the target of imperialism, not because they are Muslim, but their fundamentalism is directed against the wrong kind of person in the eyes of imperialism. They have nothing against fundamentalists. They have enlisted fundamentalists in Libya, and they have overthrown a secular regime. So a secular regime that respected the rights of women, that respected the rights of minorities, that respected the rights of black Africans, that actually brought prosperity to its people, so that a regime that when it came to power saw the population have a GDP of $50 a year. By the time it was overthrown, and the GDP was more than $16,500 a year, which is better really than the bottom 20% of the population in Britain. That was the achievement of that regime. So Syria has become a base for these movements. Syria politically, diplomatically, materially supports, for example, the Lebanese resistance movement, Hezbollah, the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, and that really is, and possibly some of the resistance movement in Iraq. And that's very, very bad for imperialism. Hezbollah in Lebanon is the only movement that has fought Israel to a standstill. Israel was considered to be a country whose forces could not be resisted by any other military in the area. In fact, the combined military might of the Arab states has never been able to halt Israel. And this little movement, Hezbollah, by itself, fought Israel to a standstill in the 40-day war not so long ago. So not only is Hezbollah hated, but anybody who dares to associate themselves with Hezbollah. The second crime of the Libyan regime is it has a very close alliance with the regime in Tehran, in Iraq. Whatever your views about the Iranian regime, there are a lot of people in the West really, they are very much influenced by silly little things. They see these mullahs wearing funny looking turbans sitting there and say, can you support these medieval looking people? They're exactly the people who have no problem with supporting equally ridiculous looking people in Israel, who got these skull caps, they've got these big curlers all over the place. In the summer heat of Gaza and the West Bank, they wear 3-piece suits and black coats, and they go around like an Englishman in colonial Nigeria in the middle of the heat in the 19th century. So if you can support one kind of ridiculous looking person, why can't you support another kind of ridiculous looking person? So it's not the turban. These mullahs are not stupid. Under each funny little turban, there's a PhD in physics and chemistry and biology. Okay, but the problem with the Iranian regime is not that it's fundamentalist. If fundamentalism was the problem, the first countries to be overthrown would be the Saudi monarchy, the Bahraini monarchy, and various other statelets, which really are not states, they're oil wells with flags. They need to be overthrown, they are fundamentalists. And so, what is the crime that the Iranian regime has committed? It follows an independent policy. It overthrew the Shah, who was a puppet of Western imperialism, and by overthrowing the Shah, they actually look after the interests of their own people. They use the oil wealth of their country for the benefit of their own people. This is supposed to be a fundamental country. In Iran, there's a greater proportion of women studying at Iranian universities than there is men studying in Iranian universities. The representation of women and institutes of higher education in Iran is greater than many other countries. Now, when Saudi Arabia, when the king of Saudi Arabia, the Emir of Qatar, the Sultan of Bahrain come and say, President Bashar al-Assad, and before that, Colonel Gaddafi, had lost democratic legitimacy. This is coming from people who don't give a chance to their people to even hold elections. What legitimacy comes from being in that position? Who was it? I'm trying to remember. Who said, quite honestly, to be a mechanic, you've got to have the skills of a mechanic. And to be a king, what is the skill you have? That you're son of somebody else and you look more or less like a human being. And so this is their democratic legitimacy. So the imperialist, American imperialism quite openly told President Bashar al-Assad, when these troubles started just over a year ago in the city of Daraa, they said, break the alliance with Hezbollah, break the alliance with Iran, and we'll let you off, and there will be no people we lose on you. So the people who are actually opposing President Bashar al-Assad's regime are not genuine opposition of the Libyan people. These are people who've been paid. These are people who've been prepared over the years. There's a television station that's run from London called Barada. It actually beams news to Syria. They couldn't get that. Majority of the population in Syria support the Syrian regime. It's a secular regime. It does not imprison women. It does not actually prevent you from having a drink if that's what you want. I'm not saying you should start all drinking, but it doesn't stop people from drinking if that's what they want. And they have let loose these people on the Syrian regime because Syrian regime does not do the bidding of American and British imperialism, but mainly American imperialism because they are the organ grinders, and there are plenty of monkeys around them, from Arab states to even sometimes Britain, although Britain is a very powerful imperialist country, has a most powerful army, which has been involved in nearly 4 wars in the Middle East since the Second World War. There's not a conflict in which British armed forces are not involved, and that's understandable, because if you look at British industry, manufacturing, there are less than 3.5 million people who are employed in manufacturing in this country. That's understandable because that's a characteristic of imperialism. One of its characteristics is export of capital. There's money to be made abroad, so productive industry is exported more and more. It's not a new phenomenon. Lenin pointed that out over 100 years ago, and it carries on. So in no imperialist country is the manufacturing population more than 13 to 17%. In Britain it's the least because Britain is the oldest imperialist country, if you like. It developed imperialist features even before it became properly imperialist, if you like, right? It had a monopoly in the world market, and it had a monopoly of colonies, or it was the biggest colonizer in the world. So out of the 3.5 million, 10% of them are accounted for by people who work in armaments industry. And a very large number of people in this country, this is not manufacturing because they manufacture nothing, they're parasites, work in the City of London, you know. So armament industry and City of London are very important to British economy. So their interest in oil, in armament, in finance are very much connected with what British imperialism is. So wherever there is a war going on, these people are ready to send British working class children and be slaughtered, and slaughter in much larger numbers other people's children abroad. That's precisely what they do in these wars. So Britain is always ready to do that. Once they've made up their mind that a country has got to go, that a regime has got to go, and this is really very much summarized by what President Hugo Chavez said, just as the troubles last year were beginning to take place in Libya. And if I can read you a quotation from him, because it more or less sums up the whole thing. He said this on 26th of March 2011. Now, some supposed political protest movements have begun in Syria. A few deaths, and now they're accusing the president of killing his people. And later the Yankees will come to bomb the people to save them. How cynical is the new format the empire has invented to generate violent conflict, generate blood in a country, to later bombard it, intervene, and take over its natural resources and convert it into a colony. You know, so it just basically sums up precisely what they're trying to do and what their whole purpose is. Once they've decided to overthrow a country, they then get about it in a very serious way. You know, they are not amateurs in this business. They don't succeed because in the end they don't represent the interests of the people of the countries they are bombing, nor do they represent the interests of the people of their own countries. So in the end they don't succeed. In fact, in my own life, from the point of view of an individual is a long one, but from the point of view of history is a very, very short period of time. In my own life, I have not seen them succeed anywhere. Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, they've killed millions of people. Yes, that is their great success. They've really protected human rights because they think that a person who has the best chance of having his human rights protected is the one who's prematurely dispatched to spheres celestial. You know, they better be near God. That's where their interests would be looked after. They should not be living on Mother Earth or terra firma. So they're dispatching these souls. And they've killed or displaced a quarter of Iraq's population. They've killed tens of thousands of Afghan people, all in the name of human rights. You know, actually, the Nazis of Germany are much maligned. Compared with what Anglo-American imperialism does, the Nazis were just amateurs. And when Nazis fought in the Second World War against the Soviet Union, against Britain, against America, there was some soldiering honor involved in it because they were fighting against powerful enemies. When these imperialist powers of our day fight, they fight against weak people. The combined air forces of the imperialist countries of the neo-Nazi NATO alliance were engaged in fighting against whom? Colonel Gaddafi's air forces. Isn't that a joke? And a sick joke at that. So, and then when they have bombed the country to ruins, our Prime Minister and the American President stand up congratulating our pilots on their bravery and the valor with which they've conducted themselves. They could equally have been playing really computer games in their sitting rooms. There would be no danger to them, because when there is no opposition, there's no danger. When a British pilot flew over Germany in the Second World War, there was a 50% chance that he'd never come back. You can actually, whether you agree with that war or not, you can actually say there is some bravery involved in it. That people were risking their lives. But people who bombed Libya, people who bombed Iraq, people who bombed Fallujah into non-existence and into smithereens actually stood no chance of being killed. They only get killed when they put their boots on the ground, and when they put boots on the ground, then they find that there's a level playing field. And then they suddenly find that this great invention of the 20th century is a great leveler, i.e. the AK-47. Because peasants can shoot just as well as those who trained by Sandhurst instructors. Right? And that's where they come from. That's why they lost in Iraq, that's why they lost in Korea, that's why they lost in Vietnam, and that's why they are utterly losing in Afghanistan. There was a Chicago meeting, and brave statements are made. We have saved Afghanistan from terror. No, we've subjected Afghanistan to the terror that Afghani people had never ever known before. We have stabilized Afghanistan. No, they haven't. They've destabilized Afghanistan. It'll take Afghanistan a long time to recover from that kind of destabilization. So when they decided to actually overthrow a regime, what do? First of all, they use grievances that people may have, justified or unjustified, among a section of society. Now, it would be wrong to say that there is no section of society in Syria or any other country that hasn't got a grievance. So there would no doubt be grievances. There are plenty of grievances that people in this country have harbor. But does it mean a foreign part should come, take up these grievances and start bombing Buckingham Palace? Much though enjoyable it might be for some people to watch. It just reminds me of the joke where somebody rings up a bank and say, "Can I speak to the bank manager, please?" And the woman said to the somber boy, "No, sir, he died last week." And then 2 days later, he rings up again, and he gets the same answer. After 4 or 5 times, the receptionist at the bank said, "Sir, aren't you the one who's rung several times?" He said, "Yes." "So why do you keep ringing?" He said, "I love hearing about it." Some of you may love the spectacle of bombing of imperialist centers, right? But the fact of the matter is, we do not actually encourage foreign people to come. We sort out our own affairs. Then what they do is that when these grievances don't work, they will then encourage every possible terrorist who can throw a bomb here, there, and everywhere. On finding that Libyan regime could not be overthrown like that, they sent armed terrorists through the borders of Syria. Now, Syria joins several countries. Syria has on its borders Lebanon, it has Turkey, it has Jordan, and there's one other.
Iran.
No, not Iran. Iraq. So, lot of the terrorists have now become freed from Libya. They've done their for imperialism. They've all been redeployed. You know, like you lose jobs in the engineering industry, you come and do work in do-it-yourself places, and then you lose there, you become a restaurant waiter. So imperialism pushes these people from one country to another. And what do? They don't have the support among the people, so they mix with the people. They shoot in all directions. And somebody is there to take a picture. And these days, everybody has a telephone which can take a picture. Even I've learned to take pictures with a telephone. And then these are sent to various imperialist media. And they say, Syrian regime is killing its people. In fact, if not thousands, at least several hundred Syrian security personnel have been killed. And when you say these are terrorists killing them, imperialism's answer is, oh no, this is the Syrian army killing them because these people refuse to shoot at the civilians. So their fellow soldiers killed them, and that's what they've done. I can see that it might happen in 1 or 2 instances, but to have actually dozens of Syrian soldiers killed, if that situation was to arise, the whole of the Syrian army would be in a state of ferment, wanting to overthrow the Syrian regime. So they're doing that. And then, when the government, of course, takes action against these terrorists, then the government is held responsible for being harsh and violating human rights, committing genocide, committing crimes against humanity. And if that's not enough, you then send an application to a kangaroo court, like the International Criminal Court, to start looking into the affair. And at the appropriate time, the flunkies who man that court would obviously take up the case. Then you create this kind of hysterical atmosphere, and at the same time you mobilize your own media and the media of your flunkies. BBC, CNN, Fox News, Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, you mobilize them to demonize the regime, saying it's violating its human rights. All you have to do is one cue from an American official, American president, British prime minister, which simply describes Bashar al-Assad as a criminal, as a thug, as a killer, etc. And every idiot thinks that must be the case because our prime minister said he's a killer, just you think he's a killer. The biggest killers are actually in Washington, in London, in Berlin, Paris, and in Tel Aviv. That's where you want to find killers if you really want to find mass murderers on an industrial scale. Then, of course, along with that, you apply sanctions against the country. You stop it from having financial relations of any kind with banks. Finance is controlled by imperialism. Without banks, you cannot trade. Somebody like me with a little sum of money can keep it under his mattress. But you cannot trade as a country without having financial contact. That's how they try to strangle from countries like North Korea to Iran to Iraq to Syria to Afghanistan or whatever the case may be. And so they apply sanctions. So through a whole gamut of these things, attempts are made to basically bring down the regime. And if they haven't been able to bring down the regime, it is because the Syrian regime has tremendous support among its people. The center of support for the Libyan regime was Damascus. So what do? So you send somebody to throw a bomb in the middle of the city. You basically try to cause mayhem. You try to cause demoralization among the population. You try and bring people to a position. They say, we are suffering, so what we might agree to the regime being overthrown. Maybe things will be better. But things really will not be better. If the regime is overthrown, they'll go back 50, 60 years to the horrible conditions of existence that they had, just as the Libyan people have now gone. Even businessmen from places like Lebanon, from places like Hong Kong are saying Libya will not survive as a single country. Imperialism doesn't care that it's not a single country. All they want is certain areas around Benghazi, where oil is extracted, to be under their control. Nominally under the control of local people, but actually under the control of imperialism. Since the Libyan regime was overthrown, the position of the population has become almost unbearable. Libyan regime was supposed to be committing human rights violations. The real human rights violations in Libya actually began after the overthrow of the Libyan regime. Thousands of people are being tortured in dungeons and torture chambers in Libya for no other reason than they were supporters of Colonel Gaddafi. You know, they were not even actually close to the regime, they were just ordinary supporters. Whole towns and villages have been erased for their known loyalty to the Libyan regime. And you can see that they had loyalty to the Libyan regime, because the Libyan regime has brought them prosperity. Libyan regime was a regime that actually brought them dignity. It was a regime that brought them good education, good health facilities, good housing. Colonel Gaddafi is portrayed. I go to India sometimes and I meet some rich Indians. And they say, oh, it's good Gaddafi is overthrown. I said, why is it good? Oh, he was just a loony, wasn't he? So I said, why was he a loony? He lived in a tent. Well, first of all, living in a tent doesn't make you a loony. There were thousands of Europeans who go on tenting holidays would have to be described as lunatics. But Colonel Gaddafi had a very good reason for doing that. And the reason was that when he came to power, he said the Libyan people are basically living in tents. I will not live in an ordinary house, and my parents will not live in an ordinary house till every Libyan has a house. By the time that Colonel Gaddafi was overthrown, every Libyan lived in a good house. Actually, it was the only country in Africa where you could go, there were no shanty towns. You could find shanty towns in every other country in Asia and Africa, except perhaps China. You can find shanty towns in Bombay. But India is the largest democracy in the world. Not because it's a democracy in the world, it is because American imperialism has great hopes placed on India. They hope to be able to mobilize India against China. So India can commit any crime and it will not even be mentioned that India has done anything wrong. A woman in Saudi Arabia cannot drive. She cannot go out on her own. She's got to be accompanied by a male, even if that male be her 5-year-old son. You know, there's got to be a male guardian for the woman to go out, and a 5-year-old son is considered responsible enough compared with a woman to go out. So this is what is happening in that area. The Zionists are killing Palestinians by the hundreds. Each year they kill hundreds of Palestinians. Recently, there was a big hoo-ha in the Western press that the former Prime Minister and the leader of the so-called Orange Revolution in Ukraine was in prison and she was being badly treated. At the same time as thousands of Palestinian prisoners were going on hunger strike over bad treatment, and not a word was being said in the press. Every now and then some small thing, but nothing much. Can you just imagine if 2,000 prisoners had gone on hunger strike in Syrian jails? What a story it would make. 24-hour wall-to-wall coverage of the event. No, nothing at all. Because really the only human right imperialism respects is the right of one human being to exploit another, and the right of a tiny minority of imperialist countries to exploit the vast hundreds of millions of people in the vast continents of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That is the only human right they respect. In order to actually safeguard that human right, in the 20th century alone, they've been responsible for 100 million deaths in the two world wars to decide which group of the imperialist bandits shall have what share of the world's booty. That's what they do. So it's got nothing to do with protecting human rights. It's got nothing to do with fighting against terror or not. If they were fighting against terror, if they're fighting against fundamentalism, as we are told in Afghanistan, why would they be employing jihadis in Libya and bringing them also to places like Syria to fight? They have nothing against the jihadis. The jihadis are only wrong when they turn their guns against the people who made them jihadis. I, as a young man, knew Afghanistan. Afghanistan was not a fundamentalist place. Every hippie in Europe went to Afghanistan to have a good life. That was a place to go. You went there, you enjoyed hash, you could have a drink, you could mix with the local women population. Nobody stopped you doing. Middle East was a very progressive place with very strong communist parties. Imperialism joined with the nationalists to finish off the communists in Iraq and a number of other places. Having finished off the communists, they then turned on the nationalists. And when the nationalists were destroyed, where could the opposition to imperialism and the local ruling classes come from? It was forced to retreat into the four walls of the mosque. It's the only place where security forces cannot come every day and bomb you. So in the mosque, what language can you speak? The language of Quran, which means the language of the 7th century. And first you turn people into the mosque, and then you say they are fundamentalists, they speak the language of the 7th century. Well, even if they speak in the language of the 7th century, the Zionists next door speak the language 2000 BC. And what's their claim to Palestine? Their claim is, God gave it to us. Well, the problem is, the Muslims say God gave it to us as well. When there are two gods with equal rights fighting, only force can decide in their circumstances. There's no way you defeat the Israelis by reason and argument and logic. You only defeat them by force. And no matter how powerful they are, no matter that they have 200 weapons of mass destruction, why are the Iranians being targeted for developing civil nuclear power when next door the Israelis have nuclear weapons, 200 nuclear weapons, which they have been able to construct with the help of America, with the help of France, with the help of South Africa. They've supplied material, know-how, and technology. They are the ones who have. Why is the International Atomic Energy Agency not sending its inspectors to Israel? Israel is the country that refuses to sign the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, as does the United States, as does India. So why are they targeting Iran in those circumstances? Got nothing to do with nuclear weapons. It's nuclear weapons by themselves don't cause war. A knife by itself does not cause somebody to murder his spouse, but some lunatics do use the knife for that. Are you going to ban knives? I mean, I am in favor of universal, non-discriminatory, viable disarmament, nuclear disarmament. Let everybody disarm. 95% of the weapons of mass destruction are held by just two countries, America and Russia. And then little bits by France, Britain, and China, and India, and Israel, and 3 nuclear weapons by North Korea. They're the only ones that hurt them, North Korea. Everybody else is fine. And Iran hasn't even got. Iran is targeted for not having nuclear weapons. If Iran had nuclear weapons, they'd be a bit more quiet. The new Korean leader in the speech that he made on the 100th anniversary of his grandfather Kim Il-sung said, "Gone are the days when imperialism threatened us with annihilation every day." And he knew why he was saying that, because they've got a bomb of their own, so they may not be able to destroy Washington, but they'll give a bloody good account of themselves if they were to be attacked. And even Madeleine Albright said that Iraq was attacked because she possessed no nuclear weapons. North Korea is not, because North Korea possesses nuclear weapons. So I am, unlike most Indian communists in India, not in Britain, I am in favor of every country having these weapons until such time as these weapons are abolished. The only way you actually stop nuclear blackmail and intimidation is that other people should have it so they cannot be threatened with these weapons. It's not because I've got love of nuclear weapons, I have none. I think there should be disarmament, both nuclear and conventional. If that was to happen, working people with their bare hands will be able to control their exploiters without any problem. I'm in favor of that. But that's not going to happen, and if it's not going to happen, I'm all in favor of oppressed people having the ability to defend themselves. This is our position. So comrades, I've taken a lot of your time, but I just want to make two further points. The question of amnesty has been raised by Sam. Amnesty, like many of hundreds and thousands of these NGOs, is an extension of imperialism. Their job is to work on behalf of imperialism. Imperialism does not pay money to those who oppose that. Hundreds of millions of dollars are given to these organizations, and they're not given so that they can be the instruments of the fight against imperialism. They're given because they fight for imperialism. Amnesty always had the viewpoint they will not support any movement or individual who uses violence. They refused to support Mandela because he had been involved in violent struggle during his youth before he was safely put away to be a non-violent person for 27 years on Robben Islands of Cape Town. Now when you adopt that position, what exactly is the result of it? Why do people take up arms? Is it they wake up and say it's very fashionable to take up arms, let's go and buy a gun and take up arms? They take up arms because all other methods of peaceful protest and resistance have failed them. They take up arms because their enemies and oppressors force it on them to resort to arms. Not so long ago, Martin McGuinness went to the London School of Economics. Times, they say, are changing. You know, he was an guest of honor at London School of Economics. And one of the people in the audience asked him a question, did he regret engaging in armed struggle? He said, I regret that there was a necessity of waging the armed struggle. I subscribe to that point of view. I regret that people have to resort to armed struggle. But if that's the only way, they would lose all their humanity if they did not pick up the weapon. People tell that the Palestinians use little rockets from Gaza to launch in the direction of Israel. And even an Israeli said, if Palestinians did not do that, they will lose all claims to humanity. You know, at least they should be actually saying, you will not get away with it. We cannot match your air force, we cannot match your bombs, we cannot match your guns, but we are still alive, and as long as we are alive, we shall continue to retaliate with whatever means we have at our disposal. So amnesty, by saying that they will not support any violent movement, what do? They end up by being on the side who are using the greatest violence against other people. So that's when amnesty stand all the time, so that's new. Every now and then we use their report when it's reports when they're critical of something, but we use the paragraph that's useful to us. But we know exactly what Amnesty International is. Secondly, and this is really the last point that I want to make, unfortunately, not only is our ruling class an imperialist ruling class which is waging war against other people, our anti-war movement is also controlled by the agents of imperialism. The British governments, whether they are Tory or liberal Tory, or they're Labour, they wage war against people abroad, and they attack working people at home. And who should control the anti-war movement? Their flunkies, the left wing of the Labour Party, the left wing of Social Democracy, inside the Labour Party and outside, like Trotskyites and revisionists. And they combine together in order to actually drown this movement into being totally useless. Over 2 million people demonstrated in 2003 against an attack on Iran. And the achievement of the anti-war movement is that that movement has now been reduced to mobilizing 50 or 100 people, and when they do mobilize, they mobilize against the regime of President Assad or against the regime of Colonel Gaddafi. That's what they mean. And when we point out that they are acting as servitors of imperialism, our organization, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, has been refused affiliation to this, because we criticize them. Since when criticizing other elements in a broad front movement has become a crime which actually warrants expulsion? They have no answer to these questions of ours. We'll continue to expose them. We'll continue to expose the John Reeses of this world. We'll continue to expose the Lindsay Germans of this world and Andrew Murrays of this world. We'll continue to say that they are the left-wing flunkies of imperialism who actually need to be got rid of, so that a proper anti-imperialist, working class, anti-war movement can be built. Because in our view, no anti-war movement can be built unless it is connected with the struggle against imperialism. Peace cannot be brought just by working for peace. Just, I can be a Quaker and I work for peace. But that's not going to get rid of it, because as long as imperialism lasts, there will be war. If you want to get rid of war, you must fight against imperialism. And we're constantly taunting the leadership of this movement, saying, if you really are serious about it, don't take us on walks every weekend to this, that, and the other place. Syria is under attack. And what's their main slogan? Don't attack Iran. They've already taken it for granted that the Syrian regime will fall. They're happy that it will fall, and they're moving on to the next target. They are really scouts and connoitering teams on behalf of imperialism, just pointing out what the next target will be. That's their function, and that's why we denounce them. And I thank you very much for listening to me. I hope there'll be some good questions I will have to say. Thank you very much.